movement really went wrong when it said that anything that was the male model was the thing that women had to be.
Right.
And instead of saying, no, the female model is a great model.
My next guest is no stranger to controversy. That was her speaking at CPAC earlier this year. A couple of her comments even drew boos from the crowd that day, but that has not stopped Mona Charen from calling out what she sees as blatant hypocrisy in both parties. Tonight, she is out with a new book that targets, in part, the Me Too movement and modern-day feminism. She believes the movement has lost its way. Earlier this week, I sat down with Mona Charen, the author of Sex Matters: How Modern Feminism Lost Touch with Science, Love, and Common Sense. The book is fascinating, and really you're pushing back on some very sort of uniformly accepted norms about how feminism is supposed to be empowering to women.
It's supposed to be pro-woman, and in some ways it was. But the point of my book is that feminism took a couple of really devastating wrong turns. One was in embracing the sexual revolution, and the other was in rejecting family life as a trap for women. And instead, what we found, we've had 50 years now of experience with modern feminism, and what we've seen is families are disintegrating, women are struggling, single women are struggling to do everything themselves, men are disconnected from their families and sometimes even from the workforce. It's time to rethink some of the assumptions that got us here.
Well, one of the things that you say is that you see declining female happiness.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you look at the General Social Survey, which they started asking questions in 1972, how happy are you? And what they noticed is that every year since, women have been less happy and men have gotten more happy. So if the feminist movement, with all of its achievements, were supposed to be the answer for women's happiness, you wouldn't expect to see that men are now happier than women and women's happiness has steadily declined. And I think a lot of it is about how insecure modern women are. They don't have the structure of marriage, family, that security that women need, because we are the ones who have babies, and we do need to be taken care of when we're in those vulnerable stages of our lives.
But you are a very independent woman. You've had a big career, very successful career. You're married, you have children. Some people say that it's difficult to have it all.
Right. So the line that I always have repeated is you can't have it all. You can have it all, but not all at once. And also, I kind of reject this whole notion of having it all because, first of all, we don't know what it is, right? It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, you've got 2.5 kids and you've got an X number of the huge income and a great career. It may mean having a fulfilled and happy and balanced life. And if that's your goal, then you definitely want to place family security right at the center of your life plan, instead of something that you just hope will come along later. And that applies to men as well as women.
All right, it's very important to get to this question about the Me Too movement and how we got here. How did, during the empowerment phase of women in this country, did we find ourselves falling prey to these awful situations with men?
Right. So in some ways, I actually think the Me Too movement is good, because I think it's women saying, I've had enough, and it's almost, you could interpret it as a rejection of the sexual revolution that the feminists unwisely endorsed in the 1970s and since then. But the fact is that by endorsing the sexual revolution and agreeing that we should just drop all of the old standards about how men should behave, what it meant to be a gentleman, that we kind of opened the door to this kind of loutish, gross behavior that we've seen in so many men. And if women are pushing back against it, great, but they should understand that feminism bears some part of the responsibility for how we got here. That when they said, of course we don't want any particular sensitivity by men, we don't want you to hold doors, we don't want you to be gentlemen, that's condescending. Well, the result was men didn't know how to behave, and some of them just defaulted to being jerks.
What about, you know, dating and flirting and how difficult those things become now in this environment where men, in some cases, who don't want to get sucked into any of this kind of trouble, feel like they just can't?
Exactly.
be themselves, or they have trouble knowing what the parameters are.
Right. I think we actually need to return to some basic rules about behavior. One of them is, if you're married, you absolutely shouldn't be looking or touching anybody who isn't your spouse. But also, just basic things like, so many of these women who came forward with the Me Too movement started were saying, well, they went to Harvey Weinstein's hotel room for a business meeting. They didn't know that that's something you shouldn't do. Well, that should be just part of the rules. That there's never a reason for a male boss to ask a woman to come to his hotel room for a business meeting, and women should be empowered, really empowered, right, to say, not happening, not appropriate.
Happening. Exactly.
Yeah.
To send that signal very clearly that you're interested in a professional relationship, and if that's not what this is, then that's it.
Right.
There's no to lay down that marker. Mona, there's so much more to talk about, but I encourage everybody to read your book. It's fascinating. It's going to be controversial, no doubt, as you often are. And we're so glad you came here first. It's great to see you tonight. Thank you very much for being here. Good luck.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Mona Sharon. So when we come back tonight, remembering the 5 victims of yesterday's shooting at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Maryland.